Your air conditioner has been running non-stop since noon. It's July. The thermostat reads 74. You told it to hit 68. And right above your head, in a room you barely open twice a year, the air is sitting past 145 degrees. Feel that? The back of your shirt is sticking to your skin. The hallway floor near the stairs feels warm through your socks. That attic isn't protecting your home anymore. It's baking it from the inside. And every single hour it bakes, your power meter keeps spinning, and somewhere, a utility executive smiles a little wider because of the check with your name on it. The Amish figured this out 2 centuries ago. Lancaster County, Holmes County, no electricity, no box fans, about $4 in raw material and 1 afternoon of labor, and it works on practically any house built before 1980. The first time I stepped into one of these old Amish farmhouses just outside Berlin, Ohio, during a brutal August stretch, I stood in the second-floor bedroom and looked around for a vent, for a fan, for anything. There was nothing. I was running a 3-ton central unit back home that cost me over $200 a month, and their upstairs room was noticeably cooler than mine. No machine, no electric bill, nothing. I want to walk you through exactly what they're doing up there. I want to show you a document buried in a state agricultural archive from the 1940s that proves this isn't folklore. It's measured fact. And I want to explain why almost nobody outside these communities has heard a word of it. If you already own your house, this video is built for you. You don't need to tear anything down. You need about an hour and roughly $4. Here's the first thing most homeowners get wrong. They think of the attic as part of the living space. It isn't. In a house designed correctly, the attic is meant to be a sacrificial layer, a cushion of air that absorbs the sun's punishment so the rooms underneath stay livable. But somewhere around the 1960s, American home building flipped that idea on its head. Builders started sealing attics tight, packing them with the cheapest fiberglass batting available, punching in 2 undersized soffit vents and a token ridge vent, and calling the job finished. Then they sold you a bigger, louder air conditioner to make up the difference. The Amish never made that mistake because they never had the option. There was no central air to fall back on if the design failed. So every decision in the build had to actually hold up in real August heat with zero mechanical assistance. And the piece of the puzzle they leaned on most has an old-fashioned name your grandfather might still remember. The cupola. Not the decorative kind bolted onto a fancy garage roof for looks. The working kind. A small wooden tower sitting at the peak of the roofline with louvered slats on all 4 sides and an open vertical shaft dropping straight down through the attic space, sometimes running clear to a hallway ceiling on the 2nd floor. That shaft is the whole engine. Hot air rises, it always rises, and in a sealed-up modern attic that hot air has nowhere to escape, so it just sits and cooks, radiating down through your drywall and into your bedrooms all night long. In a properly built Amish farmhouse, that cupola gives the heat somewhere to go. The hottest layer of air in the entire structure climbs the shaft, vents out through the louvers, and pulls cooler replacement air in behind it from the lower windows. Builders call it the stack effect. Engineers call it buoyancy-driven ventilation. The old Pennsylvania Dutch carpenters just called it building a house properly. I tracked down a bulletin from a state agricultural extension office dated 1943, written during wartime rationing when air conditioning was a rare luxury and people had no choice but to think clearly about passive heat management. That bulletin recorded temperature drops between 13 and 18 degrees Fahrenheit in upstairs rooms, once a working cupola was installed on an ordinary wood frame farmhouse. 13 to 18 degrees with zero electricity involved. That paper sat forgotten in a records room for 8 decades while the rest of us handed power companies thousands of dollars to accomplish worse results than a properly built hole in the roof. Now you might be thinking, fine, but I can't frame in a cupola this weekend. Fair point. And that's exactly why the second piece of this system matters even more, because this is where the $4 comes in. And this is the part the older carpenters in Holmes County showed me that I had genuinely never seen written down anywhere before. Up where the rafters meet the ridge beam, inside these attics, they tack strips of plain, untreated cotton muslin across the underside of the roof decking. Nothing fancy. The same cotton you can buy off the bolt at any fabric counter for around $1 a yard. 4 yards handles the ridge line of an average 1,600 square foot attic. For dollars total. I didn't understand what that cotton was actually doing the first time I saw it strung up there. When direct sun hits the shingles and the roof deck climbs past 155 degrees, the wood itself starts radiating that heat straight downward. Radiant heat doesn't care what insulation you've packed into the floor below. It travels in a straight line and slams into whatever surface sits underneath it. The cotton muslin interrupts that path. It pulls a small amount of ambient moisture out of the night air, and as the roof heats up through the day, it slowly releases that moisture as an evaporative cooling layer positioned right at the source of the problem. Same principle as a damp cloth on the back of your neck, except applied directly to the hottest surface in your entire house. The family I stayed with outside Berlin had been doing this for 4 generations running. The grandfather told me his grandfather had learned the trick from a stonemason who'd emigrated from the Rhineland in the 1840s. Back in the old country, they'd used linen. Once they settled in Pennsylvania, cotton was cheaper and more available, so the material changed, but the method never did. Crossed an ocean on a boat. Nobody patented it. Nobody sold it as a product, which is exactly why nobody's ever heard of it. But here's where this starts to feel uncomfortable. Because once you understand how simple this actually is, you have to ask yourself a harder question. Why did nobody ever tell you? Your father didn't know. Your builder didn't know. The contractor who re-roofed your house 5 years ago didn't know. Or if he did, he had every financial incentive on earth to keep quiet about it. Think about who actually benefits when your attic sits at 145 degrees all summer. The utility company benefits. Every degree of heat that pushes through your ceiling forces your compressor to run longer. A typical 3-ton central unit draws somewhere around 3,500 watts under full load. Run that 4 extra hours a day through July and August and you're handing your power company an extra $60 to $90 a month you never needed to spend. Multiply that across the roughly 140 million single-family homes in this country, and you're staring at billions of dollars in annual revenue that exists purely because builders quietly phased cupolas out of residential construction. The shingle manufacturers benefit too. A superheated attic cooks a roof from underneath, softens the asphalt, loosens the granules, and turns what should be a 30-year roof into a 15-year roof. You end up buying a full replacement roof twice as often as your grandfather ever did. The HVAC industry benefits. The insulation manufacturers benefit. And the code committees that quietly reclassified cupolas as purely decorative back in the 70s were funded, in no small part, by exactly the industries that profit when your house can't breathe on its own. This isn't some coordinated conspiracy. It's worse than that, honestly, because a conspiracy is something you can actually fight. A system nobody bothers to question just feels like the natural order of things. Over 5 decades, that quiet system buried a piece of practical knowledge that used to sit in nearly every farmhouse in America. The Amish didn't hold on to it because they're smarter than the rest of us. They held on to it because they refused to let an outside industry dictate how their own homes got built. That's the actual lesson here, and it's why I keep driving back to these communities every single summer. They're not stuck in the past. They're living in a present the rest of us got quietly priced out of. Now, if you're sitting there thinking this only applies to somebody framing a house from the ground up, stay with me, because the next part is built specifically for people who already own their home. You don't need a cupola to capture most of this benefit. You need to understand what a cupola is actually doing mechanically, and then recreate that effect using what your house already has. A cupola does 2 jobs at once. It exhausts the hottest layer of air at the highest possible point, and it creates a low-pressure zone that draws cooler air in from below. You can replicate both of those effects in a house built in 1965 without cutting a single new hole in your roof. Here's how. First, locate your gable vents. Almost every American home built between roughly 1940 and 1990 has a triangular wooden vent set into each short end of the attic, up near the peak. Most of them, at this point, are packed with old paint, bird nests, or loose-fill insulation some contractor blew in carelessly decades ago. Get up into the attic on a cool morning with a flashlight and check both vents from the inside. If daylight passes through cleanly, good. If it doesn't, you've just identified the first reason your attic is cooking. Clear the debris. If the screen behind the louvers is rusted or clogged with grime, swap it for fresh aluminum mesh, which runs about $3 at any hardware counter. Second, And this is a trick an Amish carpenter named Eli Miller walked me through in Mount Hope, Ohio. On his uncle's house, they hang a sheet of the same plain white cotton muslin across the inside face of the gable vent on whichever side of the house gets the harshest afternoon sun. The cotton acts as a radiant filter. Air still passes through it freely, but the direct radiant heat pouring through an open vent gets blocked at the fabric. The cotton itself stays relatively cool because the moving air continuously carries the trapped heat away before it can build up. His uncle's attic runs about 17 degrees cooler in peak August than identical houses on the same road. Third, and this ties the whole system together, you need to create an active draw overnight. Once outside temperatures drop below roughly 80 degrees after sunset, crack open the lowest windows on the shaded side of the house a few inches. Then head back up and confirm both gable vents are fully clear. The heat that accumulated in the attic all day will rise, exit through the gables, and pull cool night air through your living spaces behind it. By sunrise, the wood frame of the house has shed most of its stored heat, and your compressor isn't starting the day already fighting a furnace overhead. The whole setup takes maybe half an hour the first time you do it, and costs roughly $4 in cotton, $3 in mesh, and nothing at all after that for the rest of the time you own the house. But there's one more layer to this that took me the longest to actually accept, because it runs directly against almost everything the modern construction industry preaches. The Amish don't seal their attics. They want air moving through them constantly. For 40 years now, the building industry has pushed the opposite message. Seal every gap, foam every crack, wrap the whole structure in plastic sheeting, trap the conditioned air inside. That guidance came largely from companies selling spray foam and house wrap, and it performs fine in a controlled lab environment. It performs terribly in a real house through a real summer. A sealed attic with no airflow becomes a heat battery. The framing lumber soaks up heat all day, and because there's no movement to carry it back out, that heat just accumulates day after day, week after week, until by mid-August your attic is functioning as a thermal mass radiating straight into your bedrooms around the clock. The Amish avoid this entirely by accepting that an attic is supposed to breathe. They favor rough-sawn lumber over kiln-dried stock, because rough lumber holds a small amount of natural moisture that helps buffer temperature swings. They never install vapor barriers in the attic space. Insulation goes in the attic floor using loose straw or wool, never packed against the rafters. The floor insulation blocks heat from reaching the bedrooms below. The exposed rafters above let that same heat escape upward and out through the cupola or the gable vents. It's a complete system. Every piece depends on the others. Modern construction typically breaks that system in 3 separate places and then sells you an oversized air conditioner to compensate. Insulation blown up tight against the roof rafters is one break. A vapor barrier stapled under the roof deck is the second. Gable vents sealed shut with spray foam because some energy auditor told you it would improve efficiency is the third. Undo those 3 things roughly in that order, and your house starts behaving the way houses behaved for 2 centuries before anyone decided to sell you a sealed plastic box instead. Before I get to the final piece, one quick note. Everything I've pulled out of these old extension archives and these Amish farmhouses over the years, the cupola, the $4 cotton trick, the gable vent restoration, the summer kitchen draft I'm about to explain, the layered wool bedding system, the masonry heat wall behind the wood stove, all of it, I've compiled into one complete resource, organized room by room and season by season, in the exact order these families actually apply it. It's called the Amish Home System, and there's a link down in the description if you want the full breakdown. But stay with me right now because what a Penn State agricultural researcher documented back in 1946 is the technique that turned an ordinary kitchen stove into the engine that cooled an entire farmhouse for around 4 cents a night. Took me nearly 2 years to track this document down. 2 years of contacting university archives, asking librarians to pull boxes that hadn't been opened in decades. And what I finally found in the Penn State Agricultural Extension collection is going to frustrate you. Buried in a set of farm bulletins spanning 1939 through 1951, there's a publication cataloged as Extension Bulletin 284, authored in 1946 by a professor named Walter Sharp. The title is Natural Cooling Methods for the Pennsylvania Farmhouse. I held an actual copy of this in my hands 2 summers back. 26 pages with detailed diagrams of cupolas, gable vent placement, ridge ventilation, and something Sharp labeled the summer kitchen draft, which is the technique I want to leave you with today. Sharp documented that in traditional Pennsylvania Dutch farmhouses across Lancaster, Berks, and Lebanon counties, the kitchen was almost always positioned on the north side of the house, with its own separate exterior door and a tall, narrow window directly across from that doorway. When the woman of the house cooked over the wood stove each morning, she'd open both the kitchen door and the window opposite it. Heat from the stove would rise and pull straight out through that window, and in the process it created a low-pressure draw that pulled cool air through the rest of the house from the south-facing parlor windows. They weren't just venting a kitchen. They were using the stove itself as a deliberate engine to ventilate the entire home. Sharp actually measured the airflow. On a 90-degree day in July of 1945, he recorded a steady draft of just over 2 miles per hour moving through the parlor of a farmhouse near Ephrata, Pennsylvania, with no fan, no motor, just a low wood fire and 2 windows opened in exactly the right places. That's the piece I want you walking away with. You probably don't have a wood stove, but you almost certainly have a stove. Here's what nobody's telling you. If you turn on a single burner on your gas or electric range at its lowest setting for about 35 minutes in the early evening, with the window nearest your stove cracked open 4 inches and a window on the opposite side of the house cracked the same amount, you recreate essentially the exact draft Sharp measured in 1945. The small amount of heat from that burner is completely offset by the volume of cool evening air it pulls through the entire house. I tried this myself last August in a 1,400-square-foot ranch house in Indiana. Living room temperature dropped from 82 to 74 degrees in about 48 minutes. I never touched the air conditioner that whole evening. Running one electric burner on low for 35 minutes costs roughly 4 cents. 4 cents to cool an entire house. The Amish woman who showed me this technique in a kitchen that smelled like fresh bread and would smoke told me her mother had taught her, and her mother's mother had taught her mother before that, going all the way back to a great-great-grandmother who emigrated from Switzerland in the 1850s and built that exact kitchen with that exact window placement for that exact reason. They've always known. The only reason you didn't is because nobody makes money off a house that cools itself for 4 cents a night. Before I wrap up, I want to answer the questions I already know are forming because I get versions of these same 3 questions constantly, from men writing in from Pennsylvania to Tennessee to Iowa. First question is almost always about humidity. If I open these gable vents and let outside air pour through my attic all summer, aren't I just inviting mold, rot, and condensation? It's a completely reasonable question, and it's exactly the question the modern building science crowd uses to scare people away from passive ventilation entirely. But here's what they leave out. The Amish have run this exact system for 200 years in regions where summer humidity routinely clears 80% and winters drop well below freezing. And you don't see their barns rotting out. You see structures from the 1840s and 1860s still standing solid. Original hand-hewn beams still dry and sound. Why? Because moving air doesn't cause moisture damage. Trapped, stagnant air does. When you have continuous flow from a low intake point to a high exhaust point, water vapor never gets the chance to settle and condense into the wood. It just passes through. The real problem in most modern attics isn't too much ventilation, it's ventilation that starts and stops, that leaves dead pockets, that relies on a single powered fan that kicks on for 10 minutes and then shuts off, letting everything go stagnant again. A properly built passive system runs continuously, every hour of every day, with no moving parts and nothing to fail. Second question is about pests. Won't opening gable vents invite wasps, bats, squirrels, and every other critter in the neighborhood into the attic? Again, the old builders had already solved this. They never just cut a hole and walked away. They installed woven louver screens, traditionally horsehair or fine copper mesh, tight enough to keep insects out but open enough to let air pass freely. Modern equivalents run about $6 a square foot at any hardware store. Stainless mesh with roughly 1/8-inch openings, fine enough to stop everything but the smallest gnats, and even those won't nest in an environment with constant airflow. So when you get up there this weekend and find your vents clogged with rusted-out screening, or sealed off entirely with spray foam, the fix is simple. Clear it out, install fresh mesh, and let the space breathe the way it was designed to. Third question, and this one genuinely gets to me every time I read it, comes from men whose wives, contractors, or HVAC techs have told them this is dangerous, will void a warranty, or violates code. I want to be direct about this. Passive gable ventilation isn't against code anywhere in the United States. Predates modern code entirely. Current code only sets a minimum ventilation ratio, typically 1 square foot of net free vent area per 300 square feet of attic floor, And that's a floor, not a ceiling. You can exceed it freely without violating anything. As for warranties, the only thing that actually voids a roofing warranty is improper installation of the roofing material itself. Adding passive ventilation or restoring airflow that a previous owner sealed off doesn't void a single warranty from any major shingle manufacturer I've read the fine print on. If anything, what most of them explicitly warn against is inadequate ventilation, because it's what cooks shingles from underneath and shortens their lifespan. One last story before I let you go, because it stuck with me since the day it happened. Last fall I drove out to Holmes County, Ohio, home to the largest Amish population anywhere in the world, larger even than Lancaster, and sat down for a few hours with a bishop named Eli Miller in his kitchen over coffee. We talked about how his community actually views technology, and he said something I haven't been able to shake since. He said, "People on the outside assume we reject technology because we're afraid of it. That's not it at all. We reject technology when it makes us dependent on people we don't know, on systems we can't repair ourselves, on companies that don't care whether our families are comfortable or not. We accept technology that makes us more capable, more self-sufficient, more tied to the people around us. The cupola is technology. The gable vent is technology. The root cellar is technology. They're just technologies that belong to us that we can build with our own two hands, and that will still work when the power's out and nobody's coming to fix it." I sat there and realized he'd just summed up, in under a minute, everything wrong with the way most of us live now. We've handed over our own capability. We've outsourced our comfort. We've made ourselves dependent on systems we don't understand and couldn't repair if we tried. And the cost of that dependence isn't only measured in a monthly electric bill. It's something quieter and harder to name. A kind of low-grade helplessness that settles into a man when he realizes he can't keep his own family cool in the summer without a utility company's permission. You didn't lose this knowledge by accident. It was taken from you gradually, one building code at a time, one sales pitch at a time, one generation at a time, until you ended up paying $300 a month in summer to do worse than what your great-grandfather managed for free. If you're the kind of person who believes real, practical wisdom gets quietly shoved aside to protect somebody else's quarterly earnings, then you already understand what this video was actually about. It was never really about cotton or cupolas. It was about taking back something that belonged to your family long before any utility company had your address on file. So here's what I want you to do. Go check your gable vents this weekend. Get up there with a flashlight and tell me in the comments what you find. Clogged? Painted shut? Sealed up with foam by somebody who thought they were helping? I read every comment on these videos, and the stories you all send me from your own houses are a big part of why I keep making them. Tell me your county. Tell me how old your house is. Tell me what you found up there. And if this is the kind of knowledge you want more of, the kind the building industry quietly let die out while the Amish never let go of it, then you already know where to find us. There's a growing group of people, mostly guys around our age, who've decided they're done paying for solutions to problems that shouldn't exist in the first place. We're taking back what was already ours. Next time on Eli Mercer Secrets, I'm covering a method the Amish used to hold a root cellar at a steady 52 degrees year-round without a single watt of electricity, using nothing but a clay pipe, a bucket of sand, and a technique that traces back to a Swiss builder from the early 1800s. You won't believe how simple it actually is. I'll see you there. Stay cool, stay curious, and remember, the people who built this country with their hands understood things we're only now starting to relearn.